The first thing most men notice is not the tattoo itself. It's the confidence behind it. The way she walks into a room without asking for permission. The strange calm in her eyes that says she stopped caring long ago about fitting into someone else's expectations. And that is exactly why so many men become fascinated by women with tattoos without fully understanding why. Because tattoos were never just ink. Studies in psychology suggest that tattoos are often connected to identity, emotional expression, resilience, and the desire for individuality. But Stoicism teaches us something even deeper. What attracts us is rarely appearance alone. It is the energy of freedom. The visible proof that someone chose to become themselves despite the judgment of the world. A tattooed woman often carries a silent message on her skin. Every symbol, every scar colored with ink, every hidden design beneath her sleeve tells a story she may never explain to you directly. And most men make the mistake of assuming they can understand her instantly just by looking at her body. But the Stoics warned against this. Marcus Aurelius believed that human beings suffer because they judge appearances too quickly. We see an image and invent an entire reality around it. We assume confidence means peace. We assume mystery means danger. We assume rebellion means emotional chaos. But human nature is more complicated than the fantasies we project onto others. And this is where the first truth begins. Many tattooed women are not seeking attention nearly as much as men believe. In fact, several studies have shown that tattoos are often tied more closely to self-expression than social validation. The ink becomes personal ownership over the body, a declaration of identity, sometimes even recovery after pain. This surprises men because modern culture trains them to believe that every visible choice a woman makes is designed for external approval. Stoicism destroys this illusion. A wise man understands that people act according to their own internal world, not according to his assumptions. And when you date a woman who has already learned to define herself on her own terms, you quickly realize something uncomfortable. You cannot control her through approval. She already survived judgment before she met you. The opinions of strangers stopped frightening her years ago. That is why many men initially feel excited by her confidence but later become intimidated by it. A woman who is deeply comfortable with herself becomes impossible to manipulate emotionally. She notices insecurity immediately. She can sense when a man is pretending to be dominant while secretly needing validation every second. And because many tattooed women have spent years being misunderstood, judged, or stereotyped, they often develop sharper emotional awareness than people realize. This leads to the second truth. A woman with tattoos is often more emotionally layered than she appears. Men who only focus on appearance usually miss this completely. They see the ink but fail to see the experiences beneath it. The heartbreak. The rebellion against family expectations. The moments of loneliness. The need to reclaim ownership over pain. Stoicism teaches that suffering shapes character, not comfort. And many women who choose tattoos are not escaping pain. They are transforming it into meaning. That changes the way they love. Because when someone has already rebuilt themselves emotionally once before, they stop romanticizing fairy tales. They become more realistic about relationships. Less naive. Less impressed by empty promises. This is why many men describe tattooed women as intense. Not because they are unstable. Because they see through performances faster than most people. They have little patience for weak character hidden behind polished words. And here is where most men fail. Instead of becoming emotionally stronger themselves, they try to reduce her confidence. They become possessive, controlling, suspicious. They fear the attention she receives. They fear her independence. They fear the possibility that she does not need them for emotional survival. But Stoicism says attachment becomes dangerous the moment possession enters love. A weak man wants ownership. A strong man wants understanding. There is another uncomfortable reality studies have quietly suggested over the years. Women with tattoos are often perceived as more adventurous, more open to new experiences, and more willing to reject rigid social expectations. But perception and truth are not always the same thing. The Stoics constantly warned humanity about confusing reputation with reality. Some tattooed women are wild. Some are deeply disciplined. Some are impulsive. Some are calmer than anyone you have ever met. The tattoo tells you almost nothing by itself. What matters is the character underneath it. And yet human beings continue making judgments because appearance feels easier than wisdom. Men create fantasies around tattooed women the same way they create fantasies around luxury, status, or beauty itself. They imagine excitement without responsibility, passion without emotional maturity, freedom without consequences. But every experienced man eventually learns the same lesson. Intensity without wisdom becomes chaos. And that is why dating a woman with tattoos forces a man to confront himself faster than he expected. She becomes a mirror reflecting his insecurities back at him. If he is emotionally weak, he becomes jealous. If he lacks purpose, he becomes obsessive. If he craves control, he becomes fearful of losing her attention. But if he is grounded within himself, something different happens. He stops trying to dominate the relationship and starts understanding it. This is where Stoicism changes everything. Because the philosophy was never about suppressing emotion. It was about mastering perception. Seeing clearly instead of emotionally reacting to illusions created by ego, insecurity, and desire. And perhaps that is the real reason some men become addicted to women with tattoos. Not because of the ink, but because these women often represent psychological freedom. The courage to become visible without apology. The willingness to carry their story openly while the rest of society hides behind masks. And deep down, many men envy that freedom more than they desire the woman herself. But freedom comes with a price. Romance. Because without inner discipline, attraction becomes emotional dependence disguised as love. A woman who refuses to live according to society's expectations will rarely live according to yours either. Most men are not prepared for that reality when they first meet her. At first, they admire her independence. Later, they resent it. They love her honesty until that honesty exposes their own weakness. They praise her confidence until it refuses to submit to their insecurity. And suddenly the relationship becomes a battlefield between admiration and fear. This is exactly why the Stoics believed self-mastery must come before. And emotional dependence always destroys clarity. The man begins watching her too closely. He overanalyzes her words. He studies her social media activity like a detective searching for reassurance. Every delayed reply feels personal. Every moment she chooses solitude feels threatening. Not because she changed, but because his mind quietly replaced love with fear. A Stoic man notices this transformation immediately within himself. He understands that anxiety in relationships rarely comes from the other person alone. It comes from attachment to outcomes. Attachment to control. Attachment to being chosen constantly in order to feel valuable. And a woman with tattoos often forces this truth into the open faster than others because she usually carries a visible relationship with individuality. She has already accepted being misunderstood by society. She already knows what judgment feels like. Which means she is less likely to sacrifice her identity simply to make insecure people comfortable. This creates a strange paradox for many men. The very thing that attracts them to her eventually begins to terrify them. Her independence. Because independence cannot be controlled through emotional games. You cannot threaten someone with abandonment if they already learned how to survive loneliness. You cannot manipulate someone with judgment if they stopped seeking universal approval years ago. And you cannot dominate someone who values authenticity more than acceptance. This is why emotionally immature men often label strong women as difficult. Not because the woman is impossible to love, but because she requires emotional depth they never developed. And perhaps this is the third truth no one talks about. Many tattooed women become emotionally selective over time. Not because they enjoy rejecting people. Because experience taught them how expensive vulnerability can become in the wrong hands. The world often romanticizes women with tattoos while simultaneously judging them. Men desire them physically while secretly assuming they are less worthy of emotional respect. Society praises individuality until individuality stops looking conventional. Over time, this contradiction sharpens a person psychologically. She learns to observe people carefully before trusting them. She notices who speaks respectfully in private but objectifies openly in public. She notices who admires her confidence but secretly hopes to reduce it later. She notices who is curious about her story and who only fetishizes the image they created in their imagination. And the frightening part for many men is this. She often notices these things silently, without confrontation, without warning. A Stoic understands the power of observation. The ancient philosophers believed most people reveal themselves eventually through patterns, not words. Character leaks through behavior. Weakness leaks through reaction. Ego leaks through the inability to remain calm when reality does not obey desire. This becomes especially visible in romantic relationships, because attraction has a dangerous way of exposing hidden insecurities. A man may appear composed in public yet become deeply possessive in private. He may speak about trust while secretly monitoring every interaction. He may call himself logical while becoming emotionally unstable the moment he feels uncertainty. And uncertainty is unavoidable when dating someone who values freedom. That is why Stoicism teaches detachment from illusion rather than detachment from love itself. You can love someone deeply without trying to own their soul. But most people never learn this distinction. They confuse attachment with devotion, possession with loyalty, control with protection. And eventually, they suffocate the very connection they feared losing. A woman who has spent years expressing herself openly through tattoos often becomes highly sensitive to emotional suffocation. The moment a relationship starts feeling psychologically restrictive, something inside her begins pulling away. Not always dramatically. Sometimes quietly. Her energy changes first. Then her openness disappears. Then the emotional distance arrives long before the physical separation ever happens. Most men notice this too late because they spend more time reacting than observing. The Stoics would call this blindness of perception. The inability to see reality clearly because emotion keeps interrupting wisdom. And reality is often simpler than people want to admit. Confidence is attractive. But self-possession is even more powerful. A tattooed woman who genuinely knows herself becomes difficult to impress through superficial status alone. Money may attract attention temporarily. Looks may create chemistry. Charm may create excitement. But none of these things sustain emotional respect for long. Character does. Consistency does. Inner calm does. Especially in moments of tension. Because many women test men unconsciously during emotional pressure. Not through manipulation, but through observation. They watch how he responds to frustration, conflict, jealousy, uncertainty, failure. Does he become reactive? Does he lose emotional control? Does he collapse into insecurity the moment he feels emotionally threatened? Most men believe attraction is built through excitement. But long-term attraction is often built through emotional stability. And this is where Stoicism becomes dangerously powerful in modern relationships. A Stoic man does not chase emotional highs constantly. He does not panic when silence appears. He does not beg for reassurance every moment uncertainty enters the room. His sense of identity is not dependent on another person's temporary mood. This creates emotional safety. And emotional safety is far rarer than physical attraction. Especially today. Modern dating has created generations of people addicted to stimulation but terrified of vulnerability. Everyone wants intensity. Very few people want accountability. Everyone wants passion. Very few people want discipline. But a woman who has transformed pain into identity often recognizes discipline immediately in another person. Because she understands what reinvention costs. Every tattoo represents a choice made permanent. And whether people admit it or not, permanence frightens modern society. People fear commitment, fear discomfort, fear consequences that cannot easily be erased. Yet tattoos challenge this fear directly. They say, this mattered enough for me to carry it permanently. That mindset often extends beyond appearance. It appears in loyalty, in resilience, in emotional memory, and sometimes in the scars they never fully discuss. Which leads to another truth many men misunderstand completely. Not every tattoo represents rebellion. Sometimes it represents survival. Sometimes it marks the end of a version of herself that no longer exists. A date. A symbol. A phrase hidden beneath clothing that no one asks about. Men often assume tattoos are meant to communicate outwardly, but many of them are deeply private conversations between a person and their own history. And history changes the way people love. A woman who has endured betrayal may value honesty more than romance. A woman who rebuilt herself after heartbreak may prioritize peace over excitement. A woman who spent years fighting to be accepted may become fiercely protective of her emotional independence. This is why shallow men struggle with emotionally experienced women. They want the appearance without the depth. They want mystery without responsibility. They want confidence without boundaries. But boundaries are exactly what protect emotionally intelligent people from chaos. Stoicism teaches that discipline is not restriction. It is protection. The ability to govern your emotions before your emotions begin governing you. And nowhere is this more important than in relationships, where attraction can easily blind people to reality. A beautiful woman can still be emotionally destructive. A confident man can still be deeply insecure. A tattoo can symbolize freedom or unresolved pain. Wisdom begins the moment a person stops worshipping appearances and starts studying character instead. This is what separates emotionally mature men from impulsive ones. The impulsive man falls in love with fantasy. The mature man pays attention to patterns. He notices how she treats people when there is nothing to gain. He notices whether her confidence remains respectful or becomes cruel. He notices whether her independence is rooted in strength or emotional avoidance. Because not all emotional distance is wisdom. Sometimes it is self-protection carried too far. And this is another uncomfortable truth many people avoid discussing. Some women become so accustomed to protecting themselves emotionally that vulnerability begins to feel dangerous even inside healthy relationships. They learn to survive by becoming emotionally self-sufficient. They learned to expect disappointment before trust had time to grow. A Stoic man understands this without trying to rescue her from herself. That is important. Because weak men often confuse love with saving someone. They believe suffering gives them purpose. They become addicted to fixing emotionally unavailable partners because it temporarily distracts them from confronting their own emptiness. But Stoicism rejects emotional dependency disguised as heroism. You cannot heal another person through self-sacrifice alone. You cannot love someone into emotional readiness. And no amount of patience can force another human being to confront wounds they still refuse to acknowledge. This is why wisdom matters more than chemistry. Chemistry creates sparks. Wisdom determines whether the fire destroys you. And men who become obsessed with external traits usually ignore this until consequences arrive. They chase intensity because calm feels unfamiliar. They confuse unpredictability with passion. They interpret emotional instability as proof of depth. But the Stoics warned repeatedly that pleasure without reason becomes self-destruction. A relationship built entirely on attraction eventually collapses under the weight of reality. Bills appear. Stress appears. Miscommunication appears. Insecurity appears. And when beauty stops distracting two people from their unresolved emotional patterns, character becomes impossible to hide. This is where many tattooed women surprise people. Beneath the bold image, some are incredibly disciplined. Not all, of course. But many learn self-reliance early. They learned how to navigate judgment, discomfort, and misunderstanding without collapsing emotionally. They learned to build identity internally rather than waiting for society to hand it to them. That creates resilience. And resilience is seductive in ways people rarely talk about openly. Because deep down, human beings crave emotional strength in others. They want someone capable of enduring hardship without losing themselves completely. Someone who remains calm during uncertainty. Someone whose identity does not collapse every time life becomes painful. This is why confidence feels magnetic. Not because it is loud. Because it feels stable. And stability is becoming rare. Modern culture encourages performance constantly. Everyone is branding themselves, curating themselves, selling versions of themselves online for validation from strangers. But a person who genuinely knows who they are moves differently. There is less desperation in them, less need to impress, less hunger for approval. And ironically, that emotional detachment often attracts people even more. A woman with tattoos who has reached this level of self-possession can become almost impossible to manipulate emotionally. Guilt stops working. Shame stops working. Social pressure stops working. Only authenticity reaches her. And this frustrates men who built their identity around control. Because control is easy when the other person fears losing you more than losing themselves. But emotionally grounded people fear self-betrayal more than loneliness. Read that carefully. It may be the most important truth in this entire conversation. Emotionally mature individuals would rather walk away alone than remain inside relationships that slowly destroy their peace. They understand that companionship without respect becomes psychological exhaustion. They understand that attention without trust becomes anxiety. And they understand that love without freedom eventually becomes resentment wearing the mask of commitment. This is why Stoicism emphasizes inner peace above external attachment. Not because relationships are meaningless, but because no relationship can remain healthy if both people secretly expect the other person to repair their identity for them. And perhaps this is the greatest misunderstanding men have when dating women they perceive as mysterious or different. They focus so much on decoding her that they forget to understand themselves. They ask what her tattoos mean while ignoring the emotional scars hidden inside their own behavior. They analyze her independence while refusing to examine their own insecurity. They obsess over whether she can be trusted while never questioning whether they themselves are emotionally stable enough to sustain a healthy connection. The Stoics believed self-awareness is the beginning of wisdom. Not judgment of others. Self-examination. Because the quality of your relationships will always reflect the quality of your inner world eventually. An angry man creates conflict even with peaceful people. An insecure man creates suspicion even inside loyal relationships. A disciplined man creates calm even during chaos. And this is why some men completely transform after loving a woman who challenged their understanding of control, freedom, and emotional strength. Not because she saved them. Because she exposed them to themselves. She revealed the parts of them they spent years avoiding. The jealousy they disguised as love. The fear they disguised as protection. The emotional weakness hidden beneath pride and masculine performance. A woman who values authenticity often becomes impossible to deceive for long because she has already spent years confronting uncomfortable truths within herself. Pain forced her inward. Judgment forced her inward. Loneliness forced her inward. And people who have survived enough internal battles tend to recognize emotional dishonesty quickly in others. This is why some men feel strangely exposed around certain women. Not controlled. Seen. And being truly seen terrifies people who built their identity around appearances. Stoicism teaches that human beings suffer more from illusion than reality itself. We create stories in our minds about who we are, who others are, and how relationships should feel. Then reality arrives and shatters those fantasies piece by piece. The man who believed confidence alone made him strong suddenly realizes he cannot regulate his emotions when attachment enters the picture. The woman who believed independence protected her from pain suddenly discovers vulnerability cannot be avoided forever. And both are forced to confront a difficult truth. Love does not only reveal affection. It reveals character. This is why relationships become one of the greatest tests of Stoic philosophy. It is easy to speak calmly when alone. Easy to appear disciplined when nothing emotionally threatens you. But intimacy exposes every crack in emotional control. Every insecurity. Every unresolved wound. Every hidden fear of abandonment or inadequacy. And the people we choose often trigger these lessons intentionally or not. A tattooed woman may symbolize freedom to one man and danger to another. The difference is rarely her alone. The difference is the psychological world each man brings into the relationship. One sees individuality and becomes inspired. Another sees individuality and becomes fearful of losing control. Perception shapes emotional reality. That is why the Stoics guarded perception so carefully. Because the mind can transform admiration into obsession within days if discipline disappears. And obsession always begins innocently. At first, he simply wants more of her attention. Then more reassurance. Then more certainty. Then more control over situations that make him uncomfortable. Slowly, love turns into emotional dependence while he continues calling it passion. But passion without self-control becomes destructive. A Stoic man understands that attraction is not ownership. Another person's beauty, intelligence, confidence, or emotional depth does not belong to him simply because a relationship exists. The moment he begins treating love like possession, fear enters the connection. Fear of replacement. Fear of betrayal. Fear of losing status. Fear of abandonment. And fear changes behavior. People become manipulative when they are afraid. Controlling when they are insecure. Emotionally reactive when they lack inner stability. This is why self-mastery matters before commitment. Without it, relationships become emotional battlegrounds where two wounded people seek reassurance from each other while secretly lacking peace within themselves. And peace cannot be borrowed permanently from another human being. It must exist internally first. Many men never learn this because modern culture teaches them to chase validation endlessly. More attention. More beauty. More status. More excitement. But Stoicism asks a far more uncomfortable question. Can you remain emotionally stable even when external things become uncertain? Because uncertainty is guaranteed in every relationship eventually. People change. Life changes. Feelings fluctuate. Hardship arrives. And if your emotional foundation depends entirely on another person behaving exactly as you want, suffering becomes unavoidable. This is why emotionally mature women often value consistency over performance. Anyone can appear charming temporarily. Anyone can create excitement briefly. But calm loyalty during difficult moments reveals far more about character than grand romantic gestures ever will. And strangely enough, this is where many tattooed women are deeply misunderstood. People assume external boldness means emotional recklessness. But sometimes the opposite is true. Sometimes those who express themselves openly become far more honest emotionally than people hiding behind polished appearances. The tattoo becomes symbolic, not of rebellion alone, but of acceptance. Acceptance of imperfection. Acceptance of past pain. Acceptance that identity is complicated and cannot always fit neatly inside society's expectations. And acceptance creates emotional freedom. A person who accepts themselves becomes less desperate for external validation, less willing to tolerate disrespect, less likely to abandon their identity simply to keep someone else comfortable. This is why some relationships with strong-minded women force men into emotional growth whether they are ready or not. Excuses stop working. Performances stop working. A person who accepts themselves becomes less desperate for external validation, less willing to tolerate disrespect, less likely to abandon their identity simply to keep someone else comfortable. This is why some relationships with strong-minded women force men into emotional growth whether they are ready or not. Excuses stop working. Performances stop working. They understand that every relationship shapes the mind in some way. The wrong connection can drain discipline, distort peace, and awaken insecurities that were once asleep. The right connection can strengthen character, deepen self-awareness, and make both people more honest with themselves. But honesty is difficult, especially in a world built on performance. People carefully construct images now. Online identities. Social masks. Controlled personalities designed to appear desirable. Yet intimacy eventually destroys performance because no one can act forever. Fatigue reveals truth. Conflict reveals truth. Disappointment reveals truth. And perhaps this is why Stoicism remains so relevant centuries later. Because it teaches people how to see beyond illusion. A tattooed woman may initially appear mysterious because men project stories onto her before truly knowing her. One man sees rebellion. Another sees confidence. Another sees emotional danger. Another sees freedom. But very few pause long enough to ask the only question that truly matters. Who is she when no one is watching? The Stoics judged character privately, not publicly. How does someone behave when attention disappears? How do they respond to stress? Do they become cruel when angry? Do they betray people when convenience appears? Do they remain loyal to their principles even when temptation arrives? These questions matter far more than aesthetics ever will. Because beauty can attract you. But character determines whether peace survives. And peace becomes priceless with age. Younger men often chase stimulation because they confuse emotional intensity with meaning. Everything dramatic feels important. Every emotional high feels like destiny. Every unpredictable relationship feels exciting because uncertainty activates desire. But over time, wise men begin craving something different. Calm. Not boredom. Calm. A relationship where trust exists naturally. Where silence does not create panic. Where individuality is respected instead of feared. Where both people can remain themselves without emotional manipulation poisoning the connection. This is where emotionally mature women often become deeply valuable. Not because they are perfect, but because they understand consequences. Pain taught them. Experience taught them. Disappointment taught them. And people who learn through suffering often develop a sharper understanding of human nature than people protected by comfort their entire lives. This can make them seem intimidating, especially to emotionally immature men. Because mature women ask silent questions simply through their presence. Can you handle honesty? Can you communicate directly? Can you remain emotionally grounded without constant reassurance? Can you respect freedom without trying to control it? Many men answer yes verbally while their behavior quietly says no. And behavior always reveals the truth eventually. A Stoic pays attention to this relentlessly. Not just in others. In himself. Because self-deception is one of the greatest dangers in relationships. People lie to themselves constantly about why they stay, why they chase, why they become jealous, why they tolerate disrespect, why they fear loneliness. But beneath almost every unhealthy attachment sits the same hidden fear. I am not enough alone. That fear changes people. It makes them cling too tightly. Compromise values. Ignore warning signs. Accept emotional chaos simply to avoid emptiness. Yet Stoicism teaches that dependence on external validation guarantees suffering. If your sense of worth depends entirely on another human being choosing you, peace becomes fragile. Your emotions rise and fall according to someone else's behavior. That is not love. That is emotional captivity. Real love allows closeness without losing identity. It allows devotion without self-abandonment. And this balance becomes essential when dating strong-minded individuals who refuse to shrink themselves to satisfy insecurity. A woman with tattoos may symbolize this refusal visibly. She already chose self-expression over universal approval. She already accepted that not everyone would understand her. That decision alone often creates psychological resilience many people underestimate. Resilient people love differently. They value authenticity over appearances, consistency over charm, depth over performance. And they become increasingly intolerant of emotional games as they mature. This surprises many men because modern dating culture rewards illusion at first. The best performer often receives the most attention initially, the smoothest words, the most confidence, the most seductive image. But illusion collapses under time. Only character survives prolonged exposure. This is why some relationships that begin with overwhelming chemistry end in exhaustion, while quieter connections slowly deepen into something stable and transformative. The Stoics understood this pattern centuries ago. Pleasure is temporary. Character is enduring. And relationships built entirely on temporary emotions eventually collapse when emotions fluctuate naturally. This is why discipline matters even in love. Especially in love. Discipline in speech. Discipline in reactions. Discipline in desire. Discipline in perception.